The moment my boss threw that coffee cup at my desk, screaming about how I was nothing but his personal servant, he had no idea he was talking to the daughter of one of the most powerful billionaires in the country. Little did this arrogant executive know, his cruel treatment was about to cost him everything he'd worked for. This is the story of how karma delivered the ultimate justice. Hi, I'm Emma. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Emma Rodriguez, and despite what you might think from my last name, I come from incredibly humble circumstances. Well, that's what everyone believes, including myself for most of my life. I was raised by my loving stepmother, Patricia, in a modest apartment in downtown Portland after my biological father supposedly abandoned us when I was just 3 years old. Patricia worked 2 jobs to support us, and she instilled in me the values of hard work, humility, and never depending on anyone else for my success. When I finished my business degree, I was determined to make it on my own, without any help. I wanted to prove that I could climb the corporate ladder through pure determination and skill. That's when I found a job posting for an executive assistant position at Pinnacle Industries, one of the largest consulting firms on the West Coast. The salary wasn't amazing, but it was a foot in the door to the business world I dreamed of conquering. The interview process was brutal. 3 rounds of interviews, personality tests, and skill assessments. But somehow, I made it through and landed the position. I was assigned to work directly under James Worthington, the Vice President of Operations. From the outside, James appeared to be everything you'd expect from a successful executive. He was in his early 40s, always impeccably dressed in $1,000 suits, drove a red Ferrari, and lived in a penthouse overlooking the city. He had that confident swagger that comes with never being told no. My first day at Pinnacle Industries should have been exciting. I walked into the gleaming 40-story building wearing my best professional outfit, a navy blue blazer and skirt set that I'd saved up for months to buy. The lobby was impressive, with marble floors and floor-to-ceiling windows that offered breathtaking views of the city skyline. Everything screamed success and prestige. James's office was on the 35th floor, a corner suite that was bigger than my entire apartment. When I knocked on his door that first morning, I was greeted by a man who barely looked up from his computer. He was handsome in that polished corporate way, with perfectly styled dark hair and steel-gray eyes that seemed to look right through people. His desk was organized to perfection, and behind him hung diplomas from Harvard Business School and several industry awards. "You must be the new assistant," he said without bothering to introduce himself or even make eye contact. "I'm James Worthington. I run operations for this entire division, which means I'm responsible for over $200 million in annual revenue. My time is extremely valuable, so I expect you to anticipate my needs before I have to ask." I nodded enthusiastically, ready to prove myself. "Absolutely, Mr. Worthington. I'm Emma Rodriguez, and I'm excited to support your success in any way I can." He finally looked up, his eyes scanning me from head to toe in a way that made me uncomfortable. "We'll see about that. In my experience, assistants fresh out of college think they know everything but usually can't handle the pressure of working with real executives. I've gone through 12 assistants in the past 2 years. That should have been my first red flag, but I was young and naive. I thought he was just being thorough and setting high standards. I had no idea I was walking into what would become months of psychological torture disguised as professional development. The first few weeks seemed normal enough. I answered his phones, scheduled his meetings, prepared his presentations, and managed his calendar. I arrived at 7 in the morning and usually didn't leave until 8 at night, but I told myself that was just the price of working in a competitive corporate environment. James was demanding but not necessarily cruel. He expected perfection, but I was determined to deliver it. The real problem started about a month into the job. James began treating me less like a professional assistant and more like his personal servant. It started small. He'd ask me to pick up his dry cleaning during my lunch break, claiming it was urgent for an important client meeting. Then he wanted me to make restaurant reservations for his personal dates, using my own phone because he didn't want these women to have his direct number. "Emma," he'd call out from his office, not bothering to use the intercom system, "I need you to drive to that organic market downtown and get my usual green juice. The one here in the building isn't good enough, and I have a board presentation in 2 hours. I need to be sharp." At first, I complied willingly. I thought these were just the quirks of working for a high-powered executive. I'd seen enough movies about corporate life to know that assistants sometimes had to go above and beyond their job descriptions. But as the weeks turned into months, James's requests became increasingly unreasonable and humiliating. He started timing my bathroom breaks. "Emma, you were gone for 7 minutes. Important clients could have called during that time. Can you please be more considerate of the company's needs?" He'd say this loud enough for other employees to hear, making me feel like I was some kind of slacker who couldn't manage basic time management. The coffee incident that would later define our entire relationship happened on a particularly stressful Tuesday morning. James had 3 back-to-back client presentations, and I'd spent the entire previous evening preparing materials, printing documents, and making sure every detail was perfect. I arrived at 6:30 that morning to set up the conference room and ensure his coffee was exactly how he liked it. Dark roast, 2 sugars, splash of oat milk, served at exactly 160 degrees. I knocked on his office door with his coffee, just as I had every morning for the past 3 months. But this time, something was different. James looked agitated, his usually perfect hair slightly mussed, and there were papers scattered across his normally pristine desk. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you were enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. "Finally," he snapped, not even looking at me. "Do you have any idea what time it is? I've been here since 6, handling a crisis with the Henderson account, and where were you?" "Probably stopping for your own breakfast while I'm drowning in work that affects millions of dollars." I was confused because I'd actually arrived earlier than usual. "Mr. Worthington, I've been here since 6:30. I was setting up the conference room for your 9 o'clock presentation and making sure—" "I don't want to hear your excuses," he interrupted, finally looking at me with an expression of pure disdain. "Just give me the coffee, and try to be more responsible in the future." I handed him the cup, but apparently something was wrong with the temperature. James took 1 sip, and his face contorted with disgust. "What is this garbage? It's cold!" How am I supposed to perform at my best when I can't even get a decent cup of coffee from my own assistant? "I'm so sorry, Mr. Worthington. Let me get you a fresh one right away." Before I could finish my sentence, James stood up abruptly and hurled the entire cup across his office. Coffee splashed everywhere. On the wall, on important documents, on my blazer, and all over the expensive carpet. I stood there in shock, coffee dripping from my jacket, watching this 40-something executive throw what could only be described as a tantrum. "Look at this mess!" he shouted, gesturing wildly at the coffee-stained office. "This is exactly what I'm talking about. You're supposed to be supporting my success, but instead, you're creating more problems for me to solve. Do you see what your incompetence has led to?" I was stunned. In my entire life, no one had ever treated me with such blatant disrespect. My hands were shaking as I tried to process what had just happened. "Mr. Worthington, I can clean this up right away. I'll get maintenance supplies and—" "No," he barked. "You'll clean it up yourself, with your own hands if necessary. This is your mess, and you'll fix it. And while you're doing that, maybe you'll learn to pay attention to details. I don't have time to train someone who can't even make coffee properly." I spent the next 45 minutes on my hands and knees, scrubbing coffee stains out of his carpet while he sat at his desk, making phone calls and occasionally glancing down at me with satisfaction. Other employees walked by his open office door, and I could see the pity and embarrassment in their eyes. Word travels fast in corporate environments, and I knew that by lunchtime everyone would know that James Worthington's assistant had been reduced to scrubbing floors. But that was just the beginning. Over the following weeks, James seemed to take pleasure in finding new ways to humiliate me. He'd send me across town during rush hour to pick up specific lunch orders, knowing it would take me 2 hours round trip and cause me to miss my own lunch break. When I'd return, exhausted and hungry, he'd complain that the food was cold and make me go back to get it replaced. He started scheduling emergency weekend work sessions that turned out to be him having me organize his personal files, clean his office, or run personal errands while he played golf with clients. "Emma, I need you to come in this Saturday to handle some urgent client matters," he'd say on Friday afternoon. Then Saturday would arrive, and I'd spend 8 hours reorganizing his personal book collection or polishing the awards on his wall. The breaking point came during the company's quarterly review meeting. James had been preparing for weeks, and I'd been supporting every aspect of his presentation. I'd researched competitor analysis, prepared financial projections, created visual presentations, and even practiced his talking points with him. This presentation was crucial for his promotion to senior vice president, a position that would come with a significant salary increase and stock options. The morning of the presentation, everything seemed to be going smoothly. I'd arrived at 5 in the morning to ensure the conference room was set up perfectly, all the technical equipment was working, and James's materials were organized exactly how he preferred. The presentation was scheduled for 10 o'clock, and by 9:30, I felt confident that we were completely prepared. That's when James called me into his office with a look of panic on his face. "Emma, we have a major problem. I just realized that the Henderson account numbers in slide 15 are from last quarter, not this quarter. The entire financial projections section is wrong. How could you let this happen?" I felt my stomach drop. I'd been working with the numbers James had given me, and I'd double-checked them multiple times. "Mr. Worthington, those are the figures you provided to me last week. I have the email where you specifically, I don't care what email you think you have." He cut me off. "The bottom line is that in 30 minutes, I'm going to look like an idiot in front of the board of directors because my assistant can't handle basic data management. Do you understand what this means for my career, for my future?" He started pacing around his office, running his hands through his hair and muttering about how this would ruin everything he'd worked for. Then he stopped and looked at me with an expression I'd never seen before. It was beyond anger. It was pure contempt. "You know what?" he said, his voice eerily calm. "I'm done trying to work with someone who clearly isn't capable of handling professional responsibilities. From now on, you're going to learn what it really means to work for your paycheck." He walked over to his desk and pulled out a legal pad, quickly scribbling down a list of tasks. "Here's what you're going to do. First, you're going to call every board member and personally apologize for the error in my presentation. Then you're going to spend your weekend recreating the entire presentation with the correct numbers. After that, you're going to clean my office, my car, and organize my apartment. And Emma?" He leaned forward, his face inches from mine. "You're going to do all of this with a smile on your face, because if you don't, I'll make sure you never work in this industry again." I stared at the list he'd handed me, feeling a mixture of anger, humiliation, and disbelief. These weren't professional tasks. They were the demands of someone who saw me as nothing more than his personal property. But I needed this job. I had student loans to pay, rent to cover, and no other prospects. So I nodded and took the list, even though every fiber of my being was screaming that this was wrong. The presentation ended up going well, despite the supposed error. James was charming and confident in front of the board, and they seemed impressed with his strategic vision for the company. I watched from the back of the room as he received congratulations and praise, knowing that much of the work being celebrated had been done by me during countless late nights and weekends. After the meeting, James was in an excellent mood. He'd received preliminary approval for his promotion, and several board members had specifically commented on the thoroughness of his research and the quality of his presentation materials. But instead of acknowledging my contribution, he used the success as an opportunity to assert even more control over my life. "Emma," he called me into his office that afternoon. "I want you to understand something. Today's success happened because I pushed you to be better. If I hadn't held you to such high standards, we never would have achieved these results." He'd send me across town during rush hour to pick up specific lunch orders, knowing it would take me 2 hours round trip and cause me to miss my own lunch break. When I'd return, exhausted and hungry, he'd complain that the food was cold and make me go back to get it replaced. He started scheduling emergency weekend work sessions that turned out to be him having me organize his personal files, clean his office, or run personal errands while he played golf with clients. "Emma, I need you to come in this Saturday to handle some urgent client matters," he'd say on Friday afternoon. Then Saturday would arrive, and I'd spend 8 hours reorganizing his personal book collection or polishing the awards on his wall. The breaking point came during the company's quarterly review meeting. James had been preparing for weeks, and I'd been supporting every aspect of his presentation. I'd researched competitor analysis, prepared financial projections, created visual presentations, and even practiced his talking points with him. This presentation was crucial for his promotion to senior vice president, a position that would come with a significant salary increase and stock options. The morning of the presentation, everything seemed to be going smoothly. I'd arrived at 5 in the morning to ensure the conference room was set up perfectly, all the technical equipment was working, and James's materials were organized exactly how he preferred. The presentation was scheduled for 10 o'clock, and by 9:30, I felt confident that we were completely prepared. That's when James called me into his office with a look of panic on his face. "Emma, we have a major problem. I just realized that the Henderson account numbers in slide 15 are from last quarter, not this quarter. The entire financial projections section is wrong. How could you let this happen?" I felt my stomach drop. I'd been working with the numbers James had given me, and I'd double-checked them multiple times. "Mr. Worthington, those are the figures you provided to me last week. I have the email where you specifically, I don't care what email you think you have." He cut me off. "The bottom line is that in 30 minutes, I'm going to look like an idiot in front of the board of directors because my assistant can't handle basic data management. Do you understand what this means for my career, for my future?" He started pacing around his office, running his hands through his hair and muttering about how this would ruin everything he'd worked for. Then he stopped and looked at me with an expression I'd never seen before. It was beyond anger. It was pure contempt. "You know what?" he said, his voice eerily calm. "I'm done trying to work with someone who clearly isn't capable of handling professional responsibilities. From now on, you're going to learn what it really means to work for your paycheck." He walked over to his desk and pulled out a legal pad, quickly scribbling down a list of tasks. "Here's what you're going to do. First, you're going to call every board member and personally apologize for the error in my presentation. Then you're going to spend your weekend recreating the entire presentation with the correct numbers. After that, you're going to clean my office, my car, and organize my apartment. And Emma?" He leaned forward, his face inches from mine. "You're going to do all of this with a smile on your face, because if you don't, I'll make sure you never work in this industry again." I stared at the list he'd handed me, feeling a mixture of anger, humiliation, and disbelief. These weren't professional tasks. They were the demands of someone who saw me as nothing more than his personal property. But I needed this job. I had student loans to pay, rent to cover, and no other prospects. So I nodded and took the list, even though every fiber of my being was screaming that this was wrong. The presentation ended up going well, despite the supposed error. James was charming and confident in front of the board, and they seemed impressed with his strategic vision for the company. I watched from the back of the room as he received congratulations and praise, knowing that much of the work being celebrated had been done by me during countless late nights and weekends. After the meeting, James was in an excellent mood. He'd received preliminary approval for his promotion, and several board members had specifically commented on the thoroughness of his research and the quality of his presentation materials. But instead of acknowledging my contribution, he used the success as an opportunity to assert even more control over my life. "Emma," he called me into his office that afternoon. "I want you to understand something. Today's success happened because I pushed you to be better. If I hadn't held you to such high standards, we never would have achieved these results. People were considering investing $50 million in our new venture, and thanks to your incompetence, they're probably going to take their money elsewhere." I tried to remain calm and professional, even though my hands were shaking. "Mr. Worthington, I tested all the equipment yesterday afternoon, and everything was working perfectly. The catering company confirmed the delivery address twice, and I sent you the investor schedules last week for your approval. Don't you dare try to shift blame onto me," he snarled, walking around his desk to stand directly in front of me. "I don't have time to micromanage every little detail. That's supposed to be your job, but clearly you're not capable of handling even the most basic responsibilities." He began pacing around his office like a caged animal, gesturing wildly as he spoke. "You know what your problem is, Emma? You think you're entitled to respect just because you have a college degree. But respect is earned, and you haven't earned anything. You're nothing but a glorified secretary who can't even manage to keep my coffee hot." His words stung, but I had learned to endure his verbal abuse without showing emotion. What came next, however, was beyond anything he'd done before. "Since you clearly don't understand the value of hard work," he continued, "you're gonna learn. This weekend, you're going to clean my entire penthouse from top to bottom. I'm hosting a dinner party on Sunday for some very important clients, and I need everything to be perfect. You'll also be serving the dinner, cleaning up afterward, and making sure my guests have everything they need." I stared at him in disbelief. "Mr. Worthington, that's not part of my job description. I'm your executive assistant, not your housekeeper or your personal servant." His eyes narrowed dangerously. "Your job description is whatever I say it is. And if you don't like it, there's the door." I'm sure there are plenty of other recent graduates who would be grateful for the opportunity to work for someone like me. But let me be clear about something, Emma. If you quit, or if I have to fire you, I'll make sure every hiring manager in this city knows that you're unreliable, unprofessional, and unable to handle pressure. You'll never work in business again. The threat hung in the air between us like a toxic cloud. I knew he had the connections and the influence to make good on his promise. James Worthington was well respected in the business community, and his recommendation could make or break a career. Without his reference, I'd be blacklisted from every decent company in the city. "Fine," I said quietly, hating myself for giving in but seeing no other choice. "I'll be there Saturday morning." "Good girl," he said with a condescending smile that made my skin crawl. "Maybe you're finally learning your place in the world. Oh, and Emma, wear something appropriate for cleaning. I don't want you getting my furniture dirty with those cheap clothes you usually wear." That weekend was the most humiliating experience of my professional life. James's penthouse was a testament to his wealth and ego, with expensive artwork, imported furniture, and floor-to-ceiling windows offering panoramic views of the city. But instead of admiring the luxury, I spent 12 hours on my hands and knees, scrubbing floors, cleaning bathrooms, and polishing every surface until it gleamed. James had left for his country club, but not before giving me a detailed list of tasks and specific instructions for how everything should be cleaned. He'd also installed security cameras throughout the apartment, ostensibly for safety, but clearly to monitor my work and ensure I wasn't taking breaks or stealing anything. As I worked, I couldn't help but think about how far I'd fallen from my dreams of corporate success. Just 1 year ago, I'd been a confident college graduate with ambitious plans for my future. Now I was essentially a live-in maid for a man who seemed to take pleasure in my degradation. I'd started this job hoping to learn about business and climb the corporate ladder, but instead, I was learning hard lessons about power, abuse, and the cruel realities of workplace exploitation. The dinner party on Sunday was even worse. James had invited 8 guests, including several potential clients and their spouses. I was required to serve the meal, refill drinks, and cater to their every need while they discussed business deals worth millions of dollars. Throughout the evening, James made a point of treating me dismissively in front of his guests, referring to me as the help, and making jokes about my inability to perform even simple tasks correctly. "You'll have to excuse Emma," he said to one of the investors after I'd accidentally spilled a small amount of wine while refilling glasses. "She's still learning the basics of professional service. It's so hard to find good help these days, don't you think?" His guests laughed politely, but I could see some of them shifting uncomfortably in their seats. They were successful business people who probably had their own assistants, and they seemed to recognize that something wasn't quite right about the dynamic they were witnessing. One woman, the wife of a prominent real estate developer, pulled me aside when I was clearing dessert plates. "Sweetheart," she said quietly, "how long have you been working for James?" "About 9 months," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. She studied my face for a moment, and I could see concern in her eyes. "You know, dear, I've been in business for 30 years, and I've never seen an executive treat their assistant quite the way James treats you. Are you sure this is the kind of experience you want to be having?" Before I could respond, James appeared beside us. "I hope Emma isn't bothering you with her personal problems, Mrs. Davidson. She has a tendency to overshare sometimes." Mrs. Davidson's expression hardened slightly. "Actually, James, I was just commenting on what a dedicated employee you have. It's rare to see someone so committed to their work that they'd spend their weekend ensuring everything is perfect for their boss's guests." "Well, that's what separates the professionals from the amateurs," James replied with a smug smile. "Emma understands that success requires sacrifice, and that there's no such thing as off hours when you're working for someone who demands excellence." After the guests left, James made me stay for another 2 hours to clean up every trace of the dinner party. By the time I finally got home, it was past midnight, and I was exhausted both physically and emotionally. I collapsed on my small apartment's couch and finally allowed myself to cry for the first time in months. What I didn't know was that Mrs. Davidson had been deeply troubled by what she'd witnessed that evening. As the wife of a successful businessman and a former executive herself, she recognized psychological abuse when she saw it. She'd also noticed something else. Despite being treated terribly, I'd maintained my professionalism and dignity throughout the evening. There was something about my demeanor that suggested I came from good breeding, despite my current circumstances. The next morning, Mrs. Davidson made a phone call to someone she thought might be interested in what she'd observed. "Alexander," she said when her call was answered, "I think I may have found your daughter." Meanwhile, I was back at work on Monday morning, feeling more defeated than ever. The weekend had crystallized something for me. This situation wasn't going to improve on its own. James had successfully broken down my confidence and self-respect to the point where I was accepting treatment that no human being should endure. But I felt trapped, with no viable alternatives and no support system to help me escape. That's when something unexpected happened. I was at my desk, trying to focus on organizing James's calendar for the week, when the elevator doors opened, and a man I'd never seen before stepped onto our floor. He was probably in his early 60s, impeccably dressed in a charcoal gray suit that probably cost more than my annual salary. He had silver hair, kind but penetrating blue eyes, and an aura of quiet authority that seemed to command respect without demanding it. Several employees immediately noticed him and began whispering among themselves. This wasn't unusual. Our floor often received visits from important clients and business partners. But there was something different about this man's presence. He moved with the confidence of someone who owned the world, yet there was a gentleness in his expression that suggested he hadn't forgotten what it was like to be human. He approached the reception desk and spoke quietly with Janet, our floor's administrative coordinator. I couldn't hear what they were saying, but I saw Janet's eyes widen in surprise before she pointed in the direction of James's office. The man thanked her with a warm smile and began walking toward our section of the floor. As he passed my desk, he slowed his pace and looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite interpret. It was intense yet caring, curious yet somehow familiar. For a moment, our eyes met, and I felt a strange connection that I couldn't explain. Then he continued toward James's office, leaving me wondering who he was and why his presence had affected me so strongly. James was on a conference call when the man knocked on his door, but he quickly ended the conversation when he saw who was waiting outside his office. I watched through the glass partition as James practically leaped to his feet, straightening his tie and smoothing his hair before opening the door with an enormous smile. "Mr. Castellanos!" James exclaimed, his voice carrying across the office floor. "What an unexpected pleasure! Please, come in, come in! Can I offer you coffee, water, anything at all?" "Alexander Castellanos!" The name rang a bell, but I couldn't immediately place where I'd heard it before. Then it hit me. Pinnacle Industries was one of the largest private equity firms in the country, with investments in everything from technology companies to real estate developments. Alexander Castellanos was a legendary figure in the business world, known for his brilliant strategic mind and his ability to turn struggling companies into profitable enterprises. But he was also known for something else: his strong ethical standards and his intolerance for executives who abused their power or mistreated their employees. There were stories in business magazines about how he'd removed CEOs and entire management teams when he discovered they were creating toxic work environments or engaging in unethical practices. I tried to focus on my work, but I couldn't help glancing toward James's office every few minutes. Through the glass, I could see him gesturing enthusiastically while Mr. Castellanos sat calmly, listening with an expression that revealed nothing about his thoughts. The meeting lasted for nearly an hour, and when it finally ended, both men shook hands professionally before Mr. Castellanos left the office. James was practically glowing when he emerged from the meeting. He called me into his office immediately, barely able to contain his excitement. "Emma, do you have any idea who that was?" he asked, pacing behind his desk with nervous energy. "Alexander Castellanos from Pinnacle Industries," I replied. "Exactly. And do you know what he wanted to discuss with me?" James's eyes were bright with ambition and greed. He's been watching our division's performance, and he's considering making a significant investment in Pinnacle Industries. We're talking about hundreds of millions of dollars, Emma. This could be the deal that makes my entire career. I nodded politely, though something about the situation felt off to me. Why would someone like Alexander Castellanos be personally conducting preliminary investment meetings? Didn't he have teams of analysts and junior partners to handle that kind of initial research? He wants to schedule a follow-up meeting next week, James continued, and he specifically requested that I prepare a comprehensive presentation about our division's operations, including our management structure and employee satisfaction metrics. This is my chance to show him that I'm the kind of leader he wants, running his investments. Over the next few days, James threw himself into preparing for the follow-up meeting with an intensity I'd never seen before. He worked late every night, had me research every aspect of Castellanos Industries' investment philosophy, and practiced his presentation countless times until every word was perfect. He was convinced that this meeting would be his ticket to the executive suite and the wealth and status he'd always craved. What James didn't know was that Alexander Castellanos hadn't come to Pinnacle Industries to discuss investments. He'd come to observe the man who had been systematically abusing his daughter for the past 9 months. Because while I'd been living my entire life believing that my biological father had abandoned me, the truth was far different from anything I could have imagined. 24 years ago, Alexander Castellanos had been a young entrepreneur building his first company when he'd met and fallen in love with Maria Rodriguez, a brilliant artist who'd immigrated to the United States from Spain. Their relationship had been passionate but complicated. Two strong-willed people from very different worlds, trying to build a life together while pursuing demanding careers. When Maria became pregnant, they'd both been overjoyed, but their relationship began to strain under the pressure of their professional obligations and cultural differences. Alexander was working 18-hour days trying to secure funding for his startup, while Maria was struggling to establish herself as an artist in a new country. They loved each other deeply, but they were both too young and too stubborn to know how to balance their personal relationship with their individual ambitions. The breakup had been devastating for both of them, made worse by their mutual pride and inability to communicate effectively. Maria had moved across the country while she was still pregnant, determined to raise the baby on her own rather than compromise her independence. The follow-up meeting was scheduled for the following Friday afternoon. James had prepared obsessively, creating a presentation that showcased every aspect of our division's success while carefully omitting any mention of his management style or employee treatment. He'd even had me compile fake employee satisfaction surveys that painted him as a beloved and effective leader. On the morning of the meeting, James was more nervous than I'd ever seen him. He'd changed his outfit 3 times, practiced his presentation until he could recite it in his sleep, and made me review every detail of the conference room setup multiple times to ensure it was perfect. "Emma," he said as I was making final preparations for the meeting, "I want you to understand something. This meeting could change everything for me, which means it could change everything for you too. If Mr. Castellanos decides to invest in our division, I'll be promoted to senior vice president within 6 months. And when that happens, I'll need an assistant who can handle the increased responsibilities that come with that level of success." What he was really saying was that if this meeting went well, my life would become even more miserable as he gained more power and influence within the company. The thought made me feel sick to my stomach, but I nodded and continued setting up the conference room. At exactly 2 o'clock, Alexander Castellanos arrived for the meeting, accompanied by 2 associates who introduced themselves as senior analysts from his firm. James greeted them with the kind of enthusiasm usually reserved for lottery winners, and I could see he was trying to project an image of confident leadership while barely containing his excitement. The presentation began normally enough, with James walking through our division's financial performance, client acquisition strategies, and market positioning. He was articulate and knowledgeable, and I had to admit that when he focused on actual business matters rather than tormenting his employees, he could be quite impressive. But about halfway through the presentation, Mr. Castellanos began asking questions that seemed designed to probe deeper into the company's operational philosophy and management culture. "Tell me, James," he said during a discussion of employee productivity metrics, "what's your approach to staff development and retention? How do you ensure that your team members feel valued and motivated to perform at their best?" James launched into a rehearsed response about mentorship, professional growth opportunities, and creating a collaborative work environment. As I listened to him speak, I marveled at his ability to present himself as a caring, supportive leader when the reality of his management style was the complete opposite of everything he was describing. "That's fascinating," Mr. Castellanos replied thoughtfully. "And how do you handle situations where employees are struggling to meet expectations?" What's your philosophy on accountability and performance improvement? Well, James said, warming to the topic, I believe in setting high standards and holding people accountable when they fall short. Sometimes that means being tough on people who aren't pulling their weight. In my experience, employees perform better when they understand there are real consequences for failure. One of Mr. Castellanos' associates made a note on his pad, and I noticed the three men exchange a brief glance that seemed significant in some way I couldn't interpret. The meeting continued for another hour, with Mr. Castellanos asking increasingly detailed questions about management practices, employee satisfaction, and operational efficiency. James answered each question confidently, apparently convinced that he was impressing his potential investors with his leadership philosophy and business acumen. Finally, Mr. Castellanos stood up and thanked James for his time and presentation. This has been very enlightening, he said, shaking James's hand firmly. I'll need some time to discuss this opportunity with my team, but I should have a decision for you within the next week. James was practically vibrating with excitement as he escorted the three men to the elevator. I could see him mentally calculating the commission and promotion opportunities that would come with landing such a prestigious investor. What he didn't see was Mr. Castellanos looking back at me one more time before the elevator doors closed, his expression filled with a mixture of love, determination, and barely controlled fury. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.